You cannot go about just at a certain level to the exclusion of the rest of the staff. We have to engage everyone. You cannot impose something. And again, we agree socially, those that have found themselves in a situation where, or maybe just monitoring or being able to see from the neighborhood, when there's a child who is staying with the parents who are not biological, and compare the child who is staying with biological parents, the care, of course there are a few exceptions, the care is generally different. In the same way, if you're going to craft strategy and just impose on employees, chances of failure are very high. So the idea is to involve employees, let them be involved from the formulation, implementation, and even as we are going to do the aspects of appraisal, checking, the employees will be more than happy because they will have been part of the formulation. They always feel good to be involved. So the biggest dilemma then is each of these it might be affected in its own way, but at the end of the day, one change is likely to affect all the other components. If you don't communicate effectively, the employees will feel disengaged. And when they feel disengaged, then you know you are doomed. You will fail to be agile. And if you cannot be agile, you cannot just even use the technology that is there. You bring new computers for people to work from home. People don't know how to use them because you haven't engaged them, you haven't trained them. You also find yourself in situations that you want to replicate strategies that worked in Company A. No two institutions are the same. You have to find different strategies. So one aspect affects the other. So this is the challenge, the dilemma that institutions, every other institution finds itself. But the distinction between those that succeed and those that do not succeed lies in how institutions operate or respond to all these changes that they are faced with. And in finding solutions, at the end of this, we need to be able to find how do we move that stone. That stone has to be moved because if we leave it the way it is, we don't want to add to statistics of dying. People always die from so many things. Should they die from this? The answer is no. And we need to appreciate that this change, or these changes, this disruption happens in, while change is unpredictable, but there's a way we can make ourselves be able to predict change. There's what is called the strategy cave. So the strategy cave, I know growing up, some of us had a very big hating for mathematics because it led to this. But just for now, please, it's nothing beyond this. It's just these 3 vertical lines and 1 horizontal line. And from here, what I'm showing is vertically, starting from below there is poor, moving up to good. And from that same point, moving to the right, time will change. So in these changes that are happening, these disruptions in the new norm, there's going to be different times at which we're going to react. There's a phase which is called the anticipatory, the reactive, and the crisis. The question is, when do we move in as institutions? When do we make the change? When do we strike? Oftentimes, as growing up as a boy, there have been times where I'm a friend to this girl. In my mind, I'm convinced that we're in a relationship because she's my friend. Then she tells me, you know, yesterday was a good day because I accepted your proposal by that person. How do you accept your proposal? Me, I think that we're in a relationship. So, it means that I delayed to strike. I was thinking that things were going well. So, institutions find themselves in this situation. We don't strike at the correct time. We're just busy escorting this person. Just busy buying things. I think I've spoken to most men. So, this is what happens to institutions. Institutions are faced with this dilemma. They don't know when to anticipate. They don't know when to strike. So the key thing is you need to strike when it matters most. So in the next few minutes, I want us to see some of the decisions that institutions have to make in these three distinct times. The time to anticipate, the time where it is reactive, and the time when it's a crisis. What goes into this? So strategy implementation, this is an equation, again, nothing mathematical, just to show that strategy implementation is mainly the function of measurement, monitoring, evaluation, persistence, as well as management buy-in. What this means is for strategy implementation to be deemed to be successful, you need measurement. You need to see where you are going. You need to see, have you arrived where you had planned to go? We need to constantly check if you are derailing, if you are moving from where you initially planned to be, then you are moving off track. If it's a train has derailed, does it continue moving? It has to be brought back to the railway line. So this is the function, but then I mainly want us to speak to the different times. So the different times that I'm putting here is that in the anticipatory stage, this is a time when we need to experiment. Unfortunately, institutions for times now do not have a panacea of, there's nothing for sure that can predict. The past is no longer as effective in informing us of the future. That we have to address. That's why we are here, because of this disruption. Because if the past was still able to inform us where we are going, then as well just based on the historical information and move on. But the reason why we are here, the past is no longer an active predictor of where we are going. So because of that, we need to experiment. We need to try out things. So the first part there is the measurement. Under measurement, things are all going well. There's nothing to warrant any headache. But then the idea is we need to start experimenting. Because if you miss it on the measurement, on the first stage of anticipatory, it means you find yourself in a situation where it will become too late. So like I showed on the outline, we are going to concentrate on these three phases: the measurement, monitoring, and evaluation. Under the measurement, like I indicated, in these changing times, before change happens, we need to anticipate. In the morning, there was a talk about scenario planning. That is anticipating change. When all is well, let's plan to move out of our comfort zones. Let's plan as an institution. Let's try out things that we've never tried before, so that when change comes, we'll have moved ahead of change. For as long as we wait for change to dictate what we're doing, we'll always come here, year in, year out. Come here, spend good nights at this, good lunch. We'll never beat change. Change is always moving. But we need to be clever about it, move ahead of time, and begin to anticipate, make experiments, try out things so that when change comes, we have a buffer. In the event that for whatever reasons, because we are rigid, we are too comfortable, we don't want to move, there is phase 2, which for the purposes of this conversation, it's the monitoring. Under the monitoring, remember we're talking about movement, the strategic game. So there, we are already going into being a bit late. Maybe my friend has already started talking to this girlfriend of mine. It's already becoming too late. It's already starting to change. So under that, we need to ask ourselves, what should we change? So this is the time, for instance, when COVID was reported, that COVID has started appearing, or cases of COVID. That was now the time of monitoring. We need to monitor what is happening. We need to have an eagle's eye, be able to check everywhere whatever is happening, so that, for instance, you cannot come at the end of the year and say we have failed to achieve this because of COVID. Because that is a crisis now. Because we should have identified COVID during the monitoring to say what should change. So the moment you see COVID as set in, you start being proactive, put measures, look at the goals. Are the goals still reflecting of where you want to go? Have the goals shifted? Do do we need more resources than before? What has to change? That is in the monitoring phase. And obviously the last stage is a crisis. This is where, as an institution, for instance, you even lose trust. People stop trusting each other. If you have a WhatsApp group as an institution, you even start accusing each other of sending information to the media or leaking out information, because it's a crisis. A crisis is characterized by there being no trust. As an institute of strategy, because there is this grouping, people start saying the president is this, people start saying you are but the president, especially those elective positions, because people have lost trust. So people become sensitive to whatever is being said. After all, when there's a crisis, when you have failed, and you have people's money to account for, people have the right to talk. So when people start talking, you start accusing them, you lose trust. It means you're in a crisis. So that's why I've deliberately put the evaluation there in red, because this is a crisis. Oftentimes, people plan, or from our respective institutions, if you go in your calendar, maybe there's even a time which has already been earmarked for evaluation. Evaluation, as we live today, you should know that evaluation is a crisis. So even as we plan, as we put on the calendar for evaluation and appraisal, we are planning for a crisis. Because things have already happened. You want to do things when it's already too late. So in my case, it means I want to evaluate what led to the girl accepting the other person and not me. It's too late. I have to move on. So the appraisals that we often talk about, we even put a calendar to say it's a time for appraisals. We are planning to fail because we are in the crisis stage. Ours as strategists should be on the green patch. Worst case scenario, we can deal with the yellow, where we need to see what has to change. But this, the good news is it's a cycle. When everything has failed, after the girl says yes to this person, now I have to change my strategy. The next person, I tell myself never to buy anything until change the strategy, never to buy until I've said that she has responded. So the red becomes the beginning point. So if we're going to use red for the sake of reporting and not to change strategies, it means again we're planning to fail. So these are the different time zones that we need to look at as we continue talking about the monitoring and evaluation of the new normal. So the new normal is such that we need to anticipate. Change is always there. We need to think ahead. We need to anticipate change. We need to look at how do we think we can move. Try things out of this world and you see how it goes. If it works, you know that if change comes, you are already moved ahead of change. Worst case scenario, under yellow, we are trying to monitor there. But obviously, it's just like the previous presenter talked about the 7 S's. There are so many frameworks that have been put in place. In these changing times, if you are again not strategic, you find yourselves, if you are an institution established to sell product A, because you're just moving with change, you start even selling things that you are not even, you have no license to sell, because you're moving with change. When you go to UTH there in Osaka, you find the people that make coffins. That's one of the biggest businesses that boomed last year, by the way, in Zambia. They were even overwhelmed. So because you are being drifted, you are not strategic, you end up doing anything. You find yourself going into coffee production. Because you haven't defined what you want to do. As an institution, change has happened. You are in loss making. The owners of the money are asking for this. You see people sneaking companies with the partner, trying to get permission to sell things that they are not licensed. You are not strategic. You are being drifted. So to stay on course in these changing times, in this new normal, there are different frameworks that have been put across by so many people. Others have since died. Because they have died, I'm a strong believer in the concept of rest in peace. Let's allow them to rest in peace. They have coined whatever they coined. They didn't know that they would COVID. So if we're going to stick to what someone says value chain so many years ago when they died, it means we are burying ourselves with them. Let's acknowledge what they said, but let's live in the moment. Yes, we acknowledge that they gave us these frameworks, but the frameworks, the way they put it, there was no code. There was no issue to do with Russia and oil. So now that we are living in this, let's say, okay, this is what they say. But ourselves, how are we defining the situation? So, out of the many frameworks, I will briefly talk about the balance scorecard. Because the balance scorecard, as we know, I was saying, if you are not strategic, if you don't remain aligned, you risk losing your thoughts. So the strategic business balance scorecard has a lot of advantages over others. Before it was coined around 1990 by Kaplan. Lucky enough, they are still available. They haven't died. But even then, as the things have changed, we accept what they started. But then, you know, society is dynamic. Why should we always just replicate what they said? It means we are depriving society of our full characteristics as an institution. Let's accept what they say, but let's localize whatever they say. So a long time ago, before the balance scorecard, measurement of success was through money, because most of the things were done using machines. So the only way you know that you have succeeded was through money. But times have changed now. You know that you cannot just deal with the money. You have to look at clients. Are clients happy with what you are doing? Apart from clients, how are your processes? If you are going to have lunch at the ZISM Hotel, are clients happy? What processes have you put in place? What measures are you putting in place to avoid people that come and hang around? When it's lunchtime, they just quickly go and join for lunch also. That's where the concept of coupon started from. There are people that will just come, specialize, they just move with the chili in their pockets. When it's time for lunch, then they just join. So they saw that the portions they were saving was not equivalent to the guests they had. So things had to change. So you cannot just define success by monies. But at the end of the day, just like we are here, we need to continuously pump into each other's knowledge. We need to continuously learn. Only then can we define that we are moving. In other words, for us not to be drifted, to be moved away in these disruptive issues, we need to make sure that we are continuously learning. This then becomes a way of using the balance scorecard to measure as a way of monitoring and evaluation of strategic plans. Like I said, people said whatever they said, but we have to define it in our own way. At the center of everything is a strategic business plan. Those that play chess, we know that when you're playing chess, you have to anticipate what the move of the other person is going to take, so that you begin planning. In the same way as institutions, whether we are in competition or we are monopolies, we need to anticipate what is coming. In this case, we are anticipating change. So when we talk of anticipating change, we still have to look at the financial aspect, the customer, the processes, as well as the learning. And then we're going to have all these different objectives. What this means is the financial is the end product. Before finances come, we have to learn. When we learn, then we improve profit processes, then we go all the way until the money is recognized. Remember, the first thing is to learn. When you learn, like the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, the rest shall be added. So the context of balance scorecard, seek ye first the knowledge that you need, as well as the skills. Then customers will be happy, and the financials shall be added to your balance sheets. So, like I was saying then, as a way of moving on, now we're going to look at the different aspects. Remember we said in these changing times, how do we anticipate? I'm going to go slightly down to look at the practicality of what we need to do as we measure. At the end of the day, after a strategy is crafted, we need to measure, we need to see where we're going. And we start asking ourselves, for instance, what does this organization, where does it want to be? What do you want to achieve as an organization? Previously, we were talking about implementing the balance scorecard. But now we are in the aspect of monitoring and evaluation. You cannot monitor before you set yourselves what you have to achieve. So in these disruptive times, we need to, as an institution, we need to be wired. When I mean wiring, just like people that have built houses, there's wiring for electricity. So that is for one. But then as an institution, all the employees have to be wired in a certain way. The thinking process has to be, we have to come together using the values that we have come up with. We all have to be baptized in that. Once that has happened, then we are all wired in the same way. When we are wired in the same way, the thinking process will be similar. And once we are on the same page in terms of thinking, chances of success are going to be high. I always like talking about in these disruptive times, we need to behave like coaches. I don't know about other sports, but I'm going to talk about soccer. I hope I have a lot of soccer fans in here. Any soccer fans? Okay, so that is good. So if you look at the soccer fan, so from soccer point of view, if you look at the coach, of course the coaches are different, but there will be coaches where as the game is being played, you see them agitated, they will not sit. But what we need to remember is, if you talk of England, of course we can localize here, but then there is this thing where you know the opponents, you know we have 18 teams. And these 18 teams, it's not an easy thing. You have to run for the entire so many months. So as a coach, you bring in players that you think are going to help you. Then you come to on weekly basis. We choose players depending on your opponent, which is strategy. You cannot have the team of 11 to meet anyone. You choose according to your opponent. So it means as a coach, first you knew that your long term, for instance, you are aiming to win the league. That was the long term view before the season starts. But on a weekly basis, you have to change players according to the opponent. But also while the game is taking place, that's why there are substitutions. When you've chosen this player, because you are anticipating that this player has always played well, but then for whatever reasons, they will let you down. Or maybe the opponent is stronger in this particular time. Or maybe the tactics of the opponent are different. You can't fit in. That's why you see coaches withdrawing some players. We need to think in the same way as coaches, as strategists. We have a longer view which we want to achieve. But then on so regular basis, we should not be ashamed to change tactics. If you know that you cannot win, we have seen teams in England, in Europe, they just defend. It's a strategy, they don't want to concede. They're just playing for a point. So in the same way as the strategies, we need to constantly change and accept that I have these players, yes, but then I need to know which player to place where. At Africa Cup, remember we saw just before taking penalties, we saw a goalkeeper being substituted. That was strategy now because they knew that this person has a higher chance of saving those. But the strategy sometimes fails. There it didn't work. But then as the strategies, we need to anticipate. The anticipation was based on whatever was going on. So under the measurement aspect, we need to be able to see how to achieve, or how do we know that we have achieved. So it means we need to break down those long-term objectives into shorter objectives. Like a coach, you break down the objective you have for the end of the season into smaller weekly things. To an extent, we've been breaking into game by game. We've heard coaches saying we take game per game. So as you are playing, you make those changes. So you have to break down your long-term objectives into shorter ones. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go into a bit deeper in what happens, not at strategic but operational level, so that we have a glimpse of how some organizations or how some dead people say that it's working. So in terms of objectives, in a balanced scorecard, ideally we are not supposed to have just around 10 to 15 objectives per scorecard. Oftentimes we have seen scorecards that have taken 4 pages, just objectives. Obviously, if you have too many objectives, you have a high chance of failing. So just as a guide, just 10 to 15 scorecards. From there, in terms of measures, how you measure success, you lower it, you bring it down to about 1 to 2 measures per objective. When you talk of measures, for instance, if you want to see if I'm going to reduce weight, how do you know that I've reduced weight? I'm going to use kgs. So that's the measure I'm going to use. So there are some objectives that can be measured from more than one ways. If you're looking at the financial performance of an institution, you can look at it from the liquidity point of view, you can look at it from profitability, from reducing costs, all those different aspects. So in the same way as a guide, you need to have about 1 to 2 measures per objectives. From there, you set targets and standards. And again, this is where disruption comes in. You are setting targets knowing that we are living in a disruptive world. We are living in an area or under the new norm. We are experimenting. Because the targets we are setting are futuristic. We are in the anticipatory stage. So we are going to set targets that are going to inform you. How do you get this information? You invest into research. Because others call them standards, meaning there are some targets that are industry specific. So, for instance, if you are under a certain regulatory board, the regulatory board will prescribe to what level of solvency you should be. So as you set targets, you cannot set a target below that. That's why I'm talking of a standard. A target has to be informed by so many things. You benchmark, you look at what is happening everywhere else. You don't want to set targets that are too low, too easy, and you keep clapping for yourselves that you have achieved. Yet the institution is being registered for non-performance. And again, you want to set yourselves targets that are too difficult, yet you have been a bit stressing, almost dying of stress, yet the financials are looking very well. So the targets, you have to get it right in these changing times. Make sure that your targets are properly informed by research as well as benchmarking. Initiatives, these are the different undertakings that institutions put in place for them to achieve the different targets. Again, initiatives keep changing because this is what is changing. When times have changed as an institution, you ask yourselves, what do we change here? This initiative, maybe it's like coming to Livingstone. You can either come by road, come by rail, or indeed fly. So you're looking at different ways of achieving the same thing. So you change depending on time. If you had an engagement and you've seen that you may not make it by rail, you should have started by rail, you should have started off on Sunday maybe for you to make it today. You have started off on Sunday. And when you get into Monday, you wait to roll out by rail. You have 2 more options. Again, you get other issues come and you know that it's not possible. You consider coming to Livingstone by flight. It's still not possible. Then what happens next? You have a presentation via technology. So the other aspect is the weight, and this is where some people tend to beat the system. What I mean by beating system? So when you come up with the different objectives, there is a weight, and these weights are user specific. What it means is when you set yourselves a target, as an example, you have an objective for this particular employee. Now this employee you have given them a measure, target, and an objective to achieve. So when you've achieved that particular objective, going by that particular employee, what's the weight of that particular objective? So people that have crafted, started within strategy, when they want to always perform, those objectives that seem to be very daunting, they put, and very difficult to achieve, they put a very small weight, such that even if they have scored 0, the impact is smaller. So it's up to now strategists, management, to be able to read through, and this is where critical thinking comes in. The rest of the processes, almost any of our colleagues back at the office can do. But when it comes to the weight aspect, this is where we need to employ critical thinking. Unfortunately, even if you use a system, the system cannot replace critical thinking. You first have to get it right on critical thinking. If if you're going to talk about the person who collects rentals as an example, there are certain areas where you want them to score because that is their core business. So the weight for that particular aspect has to be commensurate with what is happening. So this is where people beat the system. And if you're not careful as an institution, if there's no proper buy-in from management, you're going to have people giving themselves lower weight there. A situation where people are working for themselves, but things are not happening. So the weight there has to be correct. Once you get it wrong on the weight, then you find yourselves just in touches. Over the variance, that is, it's just the percentage of where you're checking. In terms of performance or the score, after you've attached the weight, you've defined the weight, which is user specific. Institutions that have made it proceed to now give the performance. In this performance, if you use the school grading system, there's the performance says voting grade division 1, division 2, division 3. Institutions have opted for different, there's a plethora of ways in which people measure or attach these scores. But for the purposes of this illustration, I've picked on 3, where you attach performance versus the weight, where you score from 1 to 3. And I'll show that in a bit, what the 1 to 3 means. And at the end of the day, you need to show who is responsible for this. The reason why we are doing all this, this was done by a lot of dead people, and their souls rest in peace. But they are still applicable up to now. If you do not assign a particular person to do a certain task, as an institution, you come to evaluate strategy. You come say, what have we done here? Where is this coming from? Who did we task to do this? We will not have achieved anything. So in the new normal, you cannot leave it open, especially where people are working from home. Because you think that things are moving when people are just working from home. They're not even working, it's working from home, of course. So that's where I need to catch it, where I need to make sure that people are being monitored. At the end of the day, you need to come up with the action items. So we talk of action items. We're talking of now deliberate measures that an institution is going to put in place to make sure that it is not swayed by whatever is happening. Remember, I said in the new normal, you need to make sure that even if you have correctly crafted the strategy and implemented it, but then the trueness of this exercise comes in monitoring and evaluation. So you need to make sure that your action items that are going to inform you how you're going to perform. So with this now, I'm going to demonstrate just in a bit what I meant by defining these matrices. I'm just showing, it might not be correct, but what I want us is to show the difference between the system thinking and the action on the ground. This is the differentiator of institutions that have implemented strategy monitoring and evaluation effectively, and those that are still I've withdrawn the word before I say it. So I'm just showing the different objectives on the far left there. For instance, the financial objective, I'm saying to improve profit after tax. The measure, as an example, I'm saying profit after tax. The target, as an example, we put 2 million. Then we are defining now so that we know that the target, that's what we are setting for this particular employee. This employee has to achieve, or this particular department has to achieve a target in terms of income or profit of 2 million, so that we are defining it at the time of giving this employee the different measures to say we have to check what you have done in terms of actual, the variance, we are going to have the score and the weight. So there on the weight, for instance, I'm showing 25%. So it means that this particular employee or this directorate, the aspect of profitability is weighing in to a tune of 25%. Like I say, this is where you get it wrong or right. So what I've done here is just to show what you have to monitor. Because you cannot monitor before you define what you have to monitor. If you talk about a motor vehicle, we know that a motor vehicle, especially those that were manufactured beyond a certain stage, when you move to a certain speed, or which is 20 kilometers per hour, the doors lock themselves. So that is the way it was defined. It was crafted like that. When the fuel levels come below a certain level, the light goes on. So that's what we are supposed to monitor in these changing times. You cannot just rush to monitor before you define what you should monitor. So what I'm showing here is, what is it I should monitor? We are defining parameters. At which point should the doors lock themselves? At which point should the fuel show that it has gone on? Or below which level? At which point should the engine check light show on the dashboard? So then these are the different scores. Then further, I'm defining this now to say, if you're going to say 3, I'm using the letter as well as the colors. So if someone has scored 3, remember I talked of the 1 to 3. So if someone has scored 3, it means they have achieved the objectives 100% or more. Because you can achieve more. So you have achieved 100% or more. Then if you use the letter connotation, we know that A is associated with the very good. So we can have A. In terms of the color code, you can use green to show that objectives have either been met or exceeded. And in that case, you define, like I said, under monitoring, first you have to define what you have to do so that you remove the subjectivity of this person saying, but me, you see 99%, but it's not 100. Again, the issue of reward was talked about in the morning, but again, we have seen institutions rewarding someone who has achieved 80%. You have taught someone. The institute asked me to come and present here. If they say, we only see you or only do this when you have arrived, then I have a breakdown in Kaloma, don't come here. Should they reward me for going up to Kaloma? They haven't done what we agreed. I haven't had this lecture. So for as long as it was postponed from before lunch to after lunch, I had not yet delivered this presentation. There was no need. I had not yet met my objective. So we've seen organizations rewarding based on the conversations that people talk about. The supervisor and the supervisee engage in a conversation concerning rewards. So reward should only be when something has happened, objectives met or exceeded, as opposed to rewarding someone for just attempting. It means then we're not going anywhere as an institution. Those monies can just be used maybe in research instead of rewarding. Research so that you better anticipate. So they can be rewarded for attempting. Maybe next time I'll just attempt. So then we can give a grade of 2 or B or yellow to show that, for instance, from 75 to 100, in that case, as an action point. You have to define it beforehand, where you just encourage. Talk of encouragement, I remember some years back when I was still at the University of Zambia, I didn't know about it, but I just received a letter from the Vice Chancellor. That letter was commending me for having gotten a minimum of B+. So I didn't know about it. I don't know whether that system is still there. So the University of Zambia would like to, just using the system, would pick out all the students that got a certain threshold and write to them. So this is where the non-monetary aspect of encouragement comes in. So because I didn't know about it, but when I received it, I tried, but because I knew about it, I tried and I didn't manage next time. But then it comes back to the communication that was talked about. People have to know that there's such a reward when you attain a certain level. So then the other aspect, when someone says 75% and below, it means objectives are not met. When objectives are not met, you sit now to say, what should we do? Does this person require training? Or were the resources that were assigned to this project, were they less than expected? Or what way do you want to improve? We need to understand. But then as for reward, it's only supposed to be meeting or even exceeding beyond. So it's this, once you define it like that, it means now you are ready to start monitoring. As long as you haven't done this, those of us in our different institutions that have not defined this and we say we're monitoring, we're just doing something else which is similar to monitoring. it's not monitoring. You have to define properly so that there's no argument. There's no subjectivity at the time of monitoring. The car doesn't argue. Once it reaches 20 kilometers per hour, just looks. It was defined, it was wired like that. Below a certain level, fuel light goes on as an indicator. As long as you haven't defined like this, especially in the new norm, you find yourselves rewarding people who have just been home in the name of working, but they've just been sleeping home. So once we have defined them like this, we are now ready to start monitoring. Remember, monitoring, we said, is a reactive phase. We should not be excited about monitoring because the ones we are defining are being anticipatory. We are setting targets in anticipation in an experimental mode. But now we are monitoring. It's a reactive phase. Already we've lost time or we've lost out by not being achieving under the anticipatory. But we find ourselves in monitoring, which is yellow, it's not very bad. So in monitoring, we need to ask ourselves, how are we collecting this information for us to monitor? How do we get to know? If a vehicle locks itself, how do we know that the vehicle has locked itself? How do we get to know? How are you collecting this information? So the way you collect information, nowadays people still going to input individual this and this and this, still subject to manipulation. The key is, how is this data collected as we are going to monitor? Is it a system? How are you collecting this information? Is it still subject to manipulation? How does it show? How do you guard yourselves against people putting information which just suits them? And the frequency, how often do you collect this information? People tell you so many things, but for me, monitoring should be, for instance, if someone is driving from Livingston to Osaka, how often do you check on the dashboard? It's almost becomes just an intuition. Every now and so often you check on the dashboard to see if you are moving well. So we need to get to those levels in this period of the new norm. As institutions, we need to get to levels where we're able to check at so high a frequency which cannot be defined by any person outside, but it's an institution, depending on the nature of the institution. How is change happening in your institution? It differs from institution to institution. We define how often we need to start monitoring. Others are going to monitor monthly, but for some, while monthly might be too early, others monthly would have missed the bus. It's too late. Times are changing fast. So it depends on, it differs from institution to institution. The idea is sit, critical thinking, buy in from management, and agree how we're going to be collecting this information. Obviously, you have to compare actual versus targets and then take corrective measures. All this is in a reactive phase. So I've tried to populate the numbers there just to see now we're monitoring. We had set ourselves targets for this particular employee or this department. This is how the employee has performed. We had asked the department to score 2 million. The actual is 1.5. The variance is negative 25%. The score, as we saw there, is only 1, and the weight is 25%. The total score coming to 0.24. This is coming because of the weight that we attached there. When you add the totals there, this person is 1.5. On the reward system there, 1.5, this person actually needs to be trained. They are in the rate, they are in rate. So there's no talking about it. It's already defined. All you are doing is just monitoring. And the numbers are populated correctly, depending on how you are getting the information. Once you put in there, the decision on how to go about it, it's already known. You don't have to be told. Because you know it was agreed beforehand. What will happen to you when you score a certain level. It's already defined. So there's no talking, no hate. You even reduce chances of being bewitched. It's already known from the system. Even ask them where reduced, and they will tell you, you know that it's the system, it's not you who has it right. It's just given. Why do we need the monitoring, the new normal? Obviously, as we saw from morning, these are disruptive time. If you're not going to monitor, you have people that are sleeping, both at home and in the offices. There are people that are just going to report for work, but nothing is happening. So that's why you need to monitor. The first thing is you need to be agile. Agility, or not to emphasize, you need to find yourselves combative. For instance, COVID is not an excuse at the time of review. Instead, it has to be identified during the monitoring aspect. You need to change objectives. You need to change targets because you know that there is this aspect now and you cannot wait for the end of time. Talk about target adjustment and also identify potential stumbling blocks in the sphere, in the political arena. What is changing using that particular framework? Identify what is changing so that quickly you see what you have to change. What you have to change, both in terms of resources, changing goalposts, and the idea is you already have this vision. You should not be swayed by the changes. You know what you're supposed to do. What should change is just different aspects, how you navigate, how you find your way. At the end of the day, you still need to reach the promised land. And obviously, you need continuous feedback of results. Don't wait for month-end, don't wait for quarterly. It's as soon as possible. And this, like I said, is defined by yourselves compared to institutions. Also, you need to monitor as the industries or times are changing. Different regulators are going to change rules. For instance, the Bank of Zambia or the financial institution, there are different legislation that were passed with the onset of COVID. The idea was to protect everyone. So in this monitoring and evaluation, if they're going to say you need to pay benefits by such a time, you need to define it as such. You need to comply. So the reason why you need the monitoring aspect is to make sure that you are seen to comply as an institution. While you are faced with a lot of challenges, you need to see yourselves complying with the regulations. After all, they can even close you, they can suspend your license. So you need to comply. And obviously, you monitor to make sure that you're not being derailed, you are not being distracted. You remain strategically focused. And when it comes to the crisis phase, remember the crisis phase is a crisis as it is. The only good about crisis is we should have learned from the crisis and make it now the new anticipatory phase. For as long as it remains a crisis, as an institution, you are in a crisis and you are a crisis. So the idea is during the evaluation phase, accept that are the results as expected. You ask yourselves those questions. If they are not, this is historical. You cannot sit planning for historical, discussing historical things. How much time do you spend as an institution in the evaluation phase? You find that you spend so much time evaluating. Yet you are looking at, while you are concentrating looking back, in front things are changing. You are spending 2 days looking at what should have happened in January. This is December. Evaluation in December, looking at what should have happened in quarter 1, quarter 2. Your friends are looking at what should happen next week because things have changed. So evaluation is only as good as what you make of it. If you want to spend the whole session talking about historical issues, then you are in crisis. You have to learn from whatever happened. You didn't achieve the objectives. You need to anticipate what more can we do going forward. And obviously we need to make sure that we ask ourselves questions. Are leaders engaged at all levels? What else has to change? Is the reward system working according to what it's supposed to be? Again, I will bring back that example. Like I said, that example we saw, it was in red. This is now at evaluation stage. It's in red. We need to ask ourselves these questions. Why didn't we achieve the objective? Does it mean we have to defer that particular objective? Has it become unachievable? Do we abandon it? Or do we change the objective altogether? So now you are changing the crisis into an anticipatory phase now. You ask yourselves, was the target unrealistic? Or were the resources that were committed, were they not enough? Both in terms of financial and human. Or you didn't do a proper internal, external analysis. You also ask yourselves, even in the yellow, you ask yourselves, we're almost reaching the finishing line. Why didn't we reach the finishing line? What was missing? Should we have introduced ICT? Should we have moved this employee to this office? Should we have done this? What changes should we have done for us to reach the finishing line? And in the green stage, also should not just clap for yourselves, we need to ask yourselves, why are the targets too easy? We need to challenge yourselves as an institution. Was the target too easy? Or if the target was okay, this one just performed, then you ask yourself, can we replicate? What can we do to make sure that that which was in red becomes yellow? That which was yellow becomes green. That's the way learning is supposed to do. These are some of the challenges that come in monitoring and evaluation in the new norm. Strategic plan, monitoring and evaluation in the new norm. Those are some of the challenges. The strategy is always changing, or where you want to be is always changing, but then you need strategy to remain focused. Okay? That strategy is a living document, just like as individuals. In the morning, we're all wearing jerseys, but now we have removed. We have responded to change. Institutions are also living institutions. Strategy is a living document. You should not wait until the weather forecast say tomorrow it will be cold, just when you wear jerseys. We know those sometimes are not even effective. The same way we change at individual level. Let's make strategic business plans, living documents that are able to remove jerseys when it is hot and to get jerseys when it is cold. The structure was already talked about. Obviously, for fear of witchcraft, people don't want to lay people, but then those things, I don't know where they exist, but the idea is the structure has to speak to what you want to achieve. So does the processes, the principles, make sure that there is change in behavior. Each time you talk about strategy, people are going to be apprehensive. If they will just run away, they will make it difficult. So you need to bring in a culture that is going to achieve what is happening. So these are some of the challenges that are there. But with all these challenges, at the end of the day, one of the working solutions, one of the solutions that has worked elsewhere is the aspect of automation. I always say, seek first the understanding of everything else. That's when you bring in the system. The system, without you understanding what goes in there, will be stuck. Clients are going to come to you, they find the system is down. They will tell you that I haven't come to ask the system, I've come to ask you. So you have to know what goes into the system before the system can tell you what you're supposed to do. So automation, obviously we're trying to replace this human hand here with an automated system. So there are different institutions, different systems that are done, that are offered by different entities to monitor strategy in real time. So the advantages of automation is like there's real time. You're able to check information just like on the dashboard of a motor vehicle, real time. There and then you're able to see whether fuel is sufficient or it's not sufficient. It's also going to give you a repository of information. You can go back to the information and check. Because you're going to be manual in Excel. Obviously, how much information can you keep in Excel? Over time, that information is destroyed. But if you have an automation, you have a system in place, you can always go back and make informed decisions, see the trends, so that you're able to make informed decisions. And you'll be able to analyze information correctly, and be able to see where you're not doing well, where you need to add some more resources. And obviously it makes work easier of having to individually input information. The system, once it's properly defined, information is populated on its own, so it's automatic. So there's no manual intervention or there's no physical inputting of information. That makes work a lot easier and even smarter. So in these disruptive times, we need to anticipate change. And as we anticipate change, imagine you buy an egg as you are coming, then upon peeling it, you find this. This is a change that is happening. Sometimes it's unanticipated. Obviously, others will say this is witchcraft. It's just unanticipated. Something has happened. There's no witchcraft there. Whatever happens, whether science doesn't agree, but we will leave it for there. But it's just a surprise. Let's get ready for surprises as institutions. Once we prepare ourselves for surprises, then we prepare ourselves how to handle those surprises. Over time, there are trends that are now, as I sum up, these are some of the trends that successful institutions that have managed to monitor strategy in these changing times that have done. To start with, you cannot set yourselves a one-year target when times are changing every day. It means you are not aligned with reality. So make the targets shorter term. Move away from long-term targets. Times are changing every day. One-year target, yet your industry, your institution is subjected to change every day. Imagine working for a bureau where you know how our currency is performing. Then you set yourself a target for end of year. Yet the dollar changes or the currency changes from morning and afternoon. Every hour is changing. So this is how shorter the targets would be. Again, they are industry specific. We should be coaches rather than monitors. As institutions, like the example I gave, let's be coaches. The coach, while standing, while the game is on, they continue coaching. They will call players, tell them what they need to change there and there, as opposed to waiting for someone to fail as if you want to facilitate them being fired. You wait for them to fail, then you appraise them. Let's be coaches in institutions as management, because a coach will not wait for a team to lose, because he will have lost also. We need to be wired in such a way that success of a junior is a success of the supervisor. When you do that, you will not wait for the monitoring or for the appraisal. There and then you are able to give information that you better change here, do this, do this. So let's be coaches. Successful institutions have moved away from monitoring. Instead, they are coaches. Also, successful institutions in these changing times have spent less time on evaluation. Like I indicated, evaluation is a crisis. Let's not spend so much time on evaluation. Instead, let's be proactive and see what we can change. Let's experiment. Let's anticipate the future so that we are not in crisis. We cannot over-invest in evaluation because it's just a result. We're looking at what should have happened in the past year instead of looking forward. And at the end of the day, let's automate so that we get feedback just in time, real time, there and then. And remember, we started with a stone. At the end of the day, the stone has to move. So how does this stone move? It's just a Trinity. If you are Catholic like me, Trinity means the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But we're talking of the strategic Trinity. We have to, and the dots there are indicating the level of importance. If you go to Dunes again, I don't know now, those that are doing physics, there are questions that have double dots. I'm sure others can relate to that. So if you see a double dot, then you know that that question you have to do it before you attempt it. So in this case, there's the aspect of evaluation, as we saw, it's the last bit of it. There's just a single dot. Maybe there should be even no dot at all, because it is a crisis. From the crisis, we need to consider monitoring. Monitoring is to show where we are. But the main thing, our main focus as strategists in these disruptive times, we need to spend most of the time on measurement. That's where we anticipate change, we start planning things, experiment things, and once we've done that, then we'll have achieved. So I'll leave you with this statement from some dead man again. In Bemba, there's a saying, it says, Akonaka miyefu, yakawepo. I tried to grow my beard, but I can only manage this. But this says, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one which is most responsive to change. As institutions, we might be doing very fine now, but it's not that which is going to make us succeed, but how we respond to change. Thank you for your time.